Well, hey, everybody. Mark here. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Menlo Midweek podcast. And we're kicking off our Path of Surrender series, which is guiding the next 40 days together as we journey towards Easter. So it's a really fun conversation. And as a reminder, we put together a devotional just for you. You can download that on the YouVersion Bible app. It's installed on your smartphone, or you can head over to menlo.church and find a link to that for desktop. So this is content that we've created just for you with videos from Phil and Cheryl guiding our weeks as we're journeying together. So let's go ahead now and jump into the conversation. Well, welcome everybody to the Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark.
My name's Jessica.
And Phil's with us today.
Woo!
Good morning, everybody.
Woo!
He's back.
What a fun day that all of us get back together.
Yay.
And following a fun weekend where we saw the Usher concert with Taylor Swift.
That was a good Usher concert.
With appearances by Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe
Can we be
and,
real?
and opener of Reba McEntire. Don't forget that.
Can we be honest? Like, it actually wasn't that great of a concert by Usher.
It was a great dance show, I thought.
I would just say that, like, they are targeting us. Like, they are targeting millennial nostalgia.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
I had that thought, too.
And it's just not aging that great. Like, Usher 20 years ago was insane.
Yep.
Usher now is like, oh, buddy, you look so tired. Like, this is just not going as well. And every year, I think we're going to kind of be like, hey, guys, I think because they're getting older, we might be getting older. Like, it's just a... So
I just saw a meme about that like yesterday of like some guy was like telling his wife, yeah, but back in the day they used to have all these like older, artists that would come on and sing, but now they're having the I get it. I'm like, no, you're older, so they are the older
That's
artists.
exactly what it is. And I feel like it was a good distraction to a heartbreaking game.
Yeah.
So that's what it needed to be.
Yeah. But then Ludacris walked on stage, and that all made it
with
better.
With a fro. That was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wearing the dodgeball uniform.
Perfect.
Saw all those memes.
So fun.
It was fun.
Well, kind of.
Sure.
The game. I mean, I had... It
was a good
The investment that I had in the game, candidly, was just how... what mood are my friends and family going to be in the next day?
Yeah.
So, like, I feel that.
Yeah. It's the all awkward, like, we're cleaning up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
So what do you got going on this week? Like just misery.
Well, and I felt like the moment that they decided to kick the field goal in overtime, I was like, well, we just lost this game. Like you can't
do that.
I don't know if you were aware, but Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback for the other side. So we just lost. I just knew it. So I started that like, let's clean up and start to get ready to go in my head the moment they kicked the field goal. So
they just played a little better offense in the first half. I feel like it could have been a little better because we were crushing the defense, but
sports.
You get it, Mark.
I get it. I understand more than I lead on, but did I watch the game? A little bit.
You watched the commercials?
Mark Kim our chief of staff, Mark Kim, said that he was watching the game strictly so he could get that code from the DoorDash ad. He was like, that's my sole purpose in watching this game.
Yeah.
I think he got it.
Really?
I don't know if he submitted it or not.
He did. Yeah,
you submitted and I missed that whole thing.
Like there's a thing that somebody shared on the
I think it was Brett.
staff chat. So you just copy and paste that into DoorDash and it enters you into some sweepstakes. So
if you have enough like box tops or something, do you get to like
you get some free books from your library and a pizza from Pizza Hut or something.
Oh, what? Let's bring that back.
Well, sounds like we need to start a new thing. Shout out to our song.
Yeah.
But also we're starting a new thing with our Lent series.
That's exactly right.
And so I thought it was really cool, Phil, hearing like it's like an overview, but also a pull us into this next season that we're in as we're kicking off our series. And so I really appreciated how you just kind of name that for a lot of people, this is going to be recycled material, but the material is still obviously worth paying attention to. And so I'd love just to dive in a little bit more.
I have an icebreaker question.
Oh, okay.
We don't all have to answer it. It's more for Phil.
So you have a question for Phil?
I have a question for Phil.
A Phil breaker.
It's more fun.
A Phil breaker question.
Do you
It'd
have...
be fun to try to break Phil. That should be a good... Okay.
Sure, yeah.
I'm going to write that down.
Like,
Menlo try sometime.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite gospel that you like? If someone was like, study a gospel, which one would you choose?
I'm way too nerdy to give a direct, quick answer to that question.
I knew, that's why I asked.
You have a favorite gospel in Hebrew or Greek.
Yeah. Well, they were all written in Greek, so you have a Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, but you don't have a Hebrew, not like in the same way. of the New Testament. Yeah, I mean, I think that it really depends on the person that I'm talking to. If you're saying like, Phil, what's your favorite gospel? It's probably between Luke and Mark, which they're the most different. Mark is the most punctuated gospel. It's the shortest. It's the most action-packed. It uses the word immediately like an insane number of times. And then Luke is a physician who actually didn't journey with Jesus personally, but interviewed a whole bunch of people who did. And so we have the most detailed account of Jesus' life in Luke. But if I'm talking to somebody that has some faith background or an experience that the Old Testament would be relevant to them, Matthew's the way to go because it's so faithful at connecting the dots between the vision of the Messiah in the Old Testament and the true fulfillment of that vision in Jesus. And then John is the one that if I'm like talking to a brand new to faith person, they've never read the Bible before, I will tell them to start in John because it assumes the least of its reader. And it also kind of says, you know, Jesus is this supernatural, greater than the universe being from the very first verse. So I think that they all have, and that's the point, right? If we read the New Testament and you were an outsider looking at it and you didn't know the story of the authors, you would go, well, why don't we just have one of these? Like, why do we need 4 biographies of Jesus' life? And that actually has to do with the nature of inspiration in the text of Scripture. Because if you go read the Book of Mormon or you go read the Quran, you're reading from a single perspective. And I think one of the beautiful things that I think affirms the inspiration of Scriptures and highlights God's creativity to me is the way he's used so many different voices and the personality of those voices to write not just the Gospels, but the entire Bible. So, like I said, I can't give us... I'm way too nerdy for that.
I didn't mean to take up half the podcast with that answer.
Hurtful, but accurate.
That's funny.
It was a great answer, though. I think so many people have an issue with, well, there's 4 different accounts that don't all say the same thing. And there's your answer.
Yep.
Yeah, and I hope, we did it even a little bit this week, but I'll be, kind of starting in Matthew most of the time. And then I'll sort of, as the kids would say, sample from other from other Gospels because they do give different details. And once you know the story of the author, you understand why, right? So you're like, well, why would that one be included in John and not Matthew? Well, because John is emphasizing the supernatural power of Jesus in a way that Matthew isn't. Oh, well, why would that detail be added in Luke? Well, because Luke was asking a whole bunch of people, so he had a bunch more data that he was pulling from. And Luke says, the reason that he did it this way is so that you could have firm confidence that what you are reading is accurate, right? So when we study it, I think it's a really cool way. The Passion, we see lots of overlap of these stories with supernatural consistency. So
when you say the Passion, what does that mean?
The Passion is typically referring to the final week of Jesus' earthly ministry. So Passion Week or Passion. If you've ever seen the movie The Passion of the Christ, that's where they got the term for.
Yeah. So. That was an interesting graphic that you showed as well that showed, I think, of the percentage of content within the books, 2/3 was pre the last.
Right, 32 years and 51 weeks. And
exactly.
Then a third of the gospel narrative is the final week of Jesus' life. So just I oftentimes I don't even think about it like that. But to be reminded hopefully helps people to know, even if you've had kind of that shiny animated version where you remember in kids' church or you remember a quick telling of some part of one of these stories, there's a lot more to mine if we're willing to spend the time.
Yep. And as we're journeying towards the Passion together, there's often a theme of fasting or a theme of surrender. Can you talk more about the intersection and how maybe that came to be and how that prepares us for that week?
Yeah, so there were a number of different traditions that were kind of coalescing around the idea of Lent and fasting. By and large, we trace its roots to about 1,500, 1,600 years ago in terms of when it became pretty popular to understand this season as Lent as a Christian distinctive. Obviously, there was even kind of some moving targets in the early years of the church about when and how Christmas and Easter would be celebrated. There were no Easter bunnies. There was no Santa yet. All that stuff would come much, much later. And so the early churches trying to figure out what does it look like to faithfully have kind of a calendar. And so I think the fasting component became a natural subset of that celebration. And candidly, fasting has historically, for followers of Jesus, been way more common than it is today. And so that's, when we think about fasting, we think about it almost exclusively outside the context of I will choose to not eat food for insert period of time. And it is that.
Yep.
But I think Lent is a really cool opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to use the parallel this upcoming weekend of like spring cleaning, right? That like Lent is this kind of opportunity every year to do kind of a spiritual spring cleaning. And what is it in my life that maybe has started to crowd out the focus that I really want to have on God? And Lent gives us an opportunity to say, I'm going to set that down for a few weeks. And the time that I would use for that, I'm going to use to say, I'm going to do this devotional reading that we're all doing together on YouVersion, or I'm going to spend time doing something that I find really restorative and connecting to God. Maybe that for you is outside. Maybe for you that's silence and solitude. Maybe for you that's music. But I just think that there's, we are in an attention economy, which I think oftentimes just means that we are in a day of distraction all the time. And I think Lent is such a gift to be able to unclutter from distraction and say, God, we're not trying to twist anybody's arm. We're saying, like, if you want God to take up a more central place in your life, I think Lent can be a great tool to do that.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but when I hear fasting, I don't think of religion. I don't think of church. I think of intermittent fasting. I think of fasting from, I'm not going to spend for, a day or two, and I'm going to do a fast
from Instagram.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it does have, Christian or religious roots, and how now, since so many things are fighting for our attention, the reason why people might want to fast is they feel a need to be more connected to something. And it's cool to see like that connection is aligning more with what God wants for you, or giving more of your attention to God. And so it was cool to see those connected. And I'm hoping that during this time, people can, we can take the word back. I don't know.
And I do think, it's so easy for us to have a self-seeking approach in anything, right?
Yeah.
Like we're all pre-wired for it. And I think that it is true that I think fasting oftentimes, even as Christians, I sort of made a nod to this weekend. We go, well, fasting is like a uniquely Christian thing. So if I just use this as like my New Year's resolution didn't go well, so I'll just fast during Lent and I'll lose the weight that I thought I would. Like, first of all, don't do that. That's a bad way to lose weight. But I also think that's missing the point. Like, the point is not getting closer to your goals. The point is getting closer to God through what you choose to fast from. And if you fast for personal gain, in my experience, restriction leads to binging. And so you can kind of see this sometimes even in the attitude that we take of fasting at Lent, where somebody will give up something that they just love, and it's getting closer and closer to the day, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait till I can eat this. I can't wait till I can do this. And there's going to be some of that that's innate, but I think the more that happens, the more it may be revealing that what maybe God wanted to replace that appetite with is not actually being replaced.
Yeah.
So
That's good. That's something that I noticed recently because, me and my wife, we did a no-spend January where we just tried not to go out to eat, not to buy anything impulsively off Amazon. And one of the unexpected, I don't know, benefits or learnings that we had was the compulsion just to buy something went away. And we're still trying to keep that. Like, I think now we're trying to do it so like we can, buy things twice a week or on certain days or something like that to help curb that appetite as it grows again. But it's interesting being a few days removed from January, it's already like, oh, hey, I want to buy that thing. And it's already creeping back up.
Yeah.
Yep.
there's a reason the company spent $7 million
sure.
for 30 seconds at the Super Bowl, right? Because it works. There's a reason. And I think to your point, I remember when I first got social media apps off of my phone a few years ago, and just sort of like the doom scroll thing of, trying to find out as you go, okay, now that's totally gone, but what am I missing, and how do I go back to it, and what do I want that to be, and what is even some of the self-restriction that I'm going to put on because there's something better than just my compulsion that I want. And I think that, some of us, we grew up in contexts where there was lots of, I say it's fundamentalism without the fun. Like there were just lots of restrictions all the time. And so out of it, sort of in pushing back from that, I think sometimes we can be like, I'm free in Christ. I'm going to do whatever I want, And then Paul would say, yeah, but we don't want to use our freedom as an excuse for sin. And so it's finding what does Christian liberty look like. And I think this is a great conversation for people to be able to have. And Lent is a great place and time of the year to do it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that the thread of screen time, social media is something that's going to affect a lot of us. And so I loved how you gave an example of, if you replace Instagram Reels with TikTok Reels, like you're missing the point.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
That was
that was spot on. Yeah. Thank you for that. I feel attacked.
I did feel like I needed to fast from social media Sunday night and yesterday.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm a Taylor Swift fan, but there was just too much of celebrating that I didn't want to see, so I just fasted from it yesterday.
It was so much. It was so much. I was with several families, and there was a group of teenage boys, and so it was just root beer bottles. But they were, every time that there was a shot of Taylor, they just like took a swig.
Yeah, we kept a count.
And I was like, if someone played a drinking game with Taylor Swift camera shots, they would be dead. Like that game, she was there too much. She was there too much.
Yeah. You asked a great question as well in your message that I'm going to be asking myself going forward. I'd encourage listeners to do that too. It's, what is the last thing you obeyed without understanding? How do you arrive there? Why did you choose to ask that? Because that question is really driving a lot of this inner motivation that maybe this fasting from things will guide our attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's two types of preaching that you typically hear when someone's trying to do what's called expositional preaching, which is my preference for preaching. Which is, I don't do it all the time. Sometimes it's gonna be more topical, but expositional preaching is like I'm gonna go to something. And I'm going to teach that thing. And so this series is a great way to do that because we're just walking through stories. But within expositional preaching, where you would exposit the passage, there are two tendencies. One's exegetical, where we lead out of. One is eisegetical, which is I lead into. And so the exegetical approach to this passage, it sort of just led me to this idea of I wanted to kind of, you'll see this continue to repeat throughout the series, I kind of wanted to frame it in terms of like when Jesus ... like almost like episodic over the course of the series. And so when Jesus asks for obedience before understanding is exactly what he's doing with his disciples that they don't fully comprehend. And actually in the second point, I talk about how what they did understand was actually incorrect and they had the wrong motives and still did the right thing like we do a lot. And so this question of, okay, so if they were willing to take a step to go get this donkey from a stranger, which there's a whole bunch of really cool commentary stuff about that, and when they say, "Hey, the Lord is asking for it," there was some sense in which they were taking it from a place that was so big that the other person that would have been asking them that question would have assumed that they were like part of the staff that they just hadn't met before. And that when they said the Lord is asking for it, what they really meant, Lord Master, was actually the owner that like owned all this stuff. So it was like kind of a play on words. It really was the Lord, but Jesus kind of knew, hey, if I say this, we'll bring it back. Like, it's fine. But anyway, it's nerdy. And so I think most of the time, I would say if we track back in our life, the biggest moments of breakthrough spiritually, it's when we answered this question in the affirmative, like, God, I'm willing to obey you before I understand you. I'm willing to obey you right now, even if I don't understand the long-term plan. And so, for us as a family, that's like most recently choosing to come to Menlo, right? Like there was some questions that we could get answers to, but there were way more we couldn't. And there's a point of, okay, there's enough, the language that I use sometimes is the difference between clarity and certainty. Have we talked about this before?
I don't think so, but I like it.
Feels
like something Phil would say.
I think a lot of times, especially in like church culture, or if you work at a large company, I think this is another place where it happens, where we sub in. What we say is I want clarity, but what we really mean is I want certainty. And by that I mean what we say is with God or with our boss or whatever, we go, I'll do that, but I need clarity about what that is. What we really mean is I need certainty that what you're telling me to do is going to work the way I think it's going to work. And I think we do the same thing with God. So we're like, oh, God, yeah, it's cool. I want this kind of a relationship. I want this kind of a financial return. I want this kind of a job. I want this kind of a thing to happen in my life. I want this kind of a healing. So if you're asking me to obey you in this area of my life, I'm willing to do that as long as you guarantee me that the thing I want, which by the way is not worship, that's just a transactional relationship, but that's not clarity, that's certainty. And I just say the only thing we can be certain of in life is certain death, right? We joke around like the only constants in life are death and taxes. And so clarity is what actually God promises us, which isn't about a destination, it's about a direction. And the direction is not towards the outcome I desire, the direction is towards him himself. And so I think that sort of asking the question of where am I asking for clarity, but what I'm really asking for is certainty. And if I wasn't pinning something on God, I'll only do this if, I think we will oftentimes get to that place of like, oh, you know what? Yeah, we do need to take a more dramatic step of obedience in this season than we thought. But I don't know what that direct step of obedience is going to do to my friend group, right? If all of a sudden I say I'm not doing this right now, or I say I'm not going there right now, or I'm spending differently, or I'm drinking differently, or I'm speaking differently, or I'm living different, like all those things will have significant consequences probably in relationship. And we don't know what those consequences are, but without understanding the consequences, are we still willing to be obedient to the one that's asking us? And I think Lent can be a great time where if you're not sure, if you're like, I don't even really know what I'm supposed to be doing, I think the focus of Lent, changing our appetite, can sort of clear the spiritual brain fog. And it's not that God's not speaking, it's that we just can't hear him over the noise.
Nice. Lots of stuff in there.
Yeah.
I think one day we'll have an episode where we do a tier list of all 300 Messianic prophecies, ranking by order. That's not this episode.
Perfect.
That's not this one.
But also, when you were kind of concluding your message and you were talking about how Jesus raised Lazarus, it's kind of illustrating this point that we can't really be certain of anything, right? But we can acknowledge that God sees the whole picture, and we don't get to see that. And so I love that there's a piece in there about obedience, a piece of there about attention, a piece of there about trust and faith. You had a great quote as well by Oswald Chambers that illustrated that as well, that said that basically like faith isn't knowing where you're led, but knowing and loving the one who's leading. And so this through line of trust and this through line of obedience, that comes through relationship and attention. And so I thought it was a great way to kick off and get our attention as we're journeying together. And so if you had more time, Phil, what else would you have included? What would you have double clicked on? Anything else?
Yeah, I think the stuff that I talked about a little bit from like a scholarly commentary perspective about you read a story like this and it feels almost like a fairy tale. Like you're like, is this supposed to be real life? Like, would they just go take a donkey? Why did they do that? There's also so some of it I've already talked about. There's also a section, I talked about it at one point in my message, but this is the anticipation of the way that people were celebrating. They would have celebrated a conquering hero coming in like in a big processional with a massive war horse, and so Jesus is this humble leader, totally different on purpose. And I tried to illustrate that a little bit. The animals that we're talking about too, it's likely that because of some of the commentary work, it's likely that either the animal that Jesus is riding on or a companion animal had never been ridden on or had this type of an experience happen before, and would have, as a result, not been cool with the entire situation. And so it's like another beautiful picture of the Prince of Peace just instantly calming an animal that like people would have been able to easily see, like, that thing doesn't get ridden on. Why is it chill with this guy? And just one more piece of evidence for the people that were watching, especially in a giant crowd with thousands of people making a bunch of noise.
Right.
It would have freaked an animal out, but it didn't.
Got it.
Based on any evidence that we saw. So I just think there are these little, little snapshots to narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow that I think give us a beautiful picture of Jesus in the week of the Passion. That we sometimes we want Jesus to be like kind of human but mostly God, and at any point in his life he can just like take the take the button up off, and he's got the S on his chest, and he puts the cape on. And because of a spiritual principle called kenosis, we know that's not what Jesus did. Jesus functioned without access to the like superpower of Jesus. Everything that he did, he tells us he did because the Father told him to do it, and the Father and the Spirit empowered him to do it. And that's why he says, hey, when I go, you're going to do greater things than me. Jesus did not have access to any greater power than we do. And I think the Passion Week is when you understand the humanity of Jesus through that lens, the week becomes, we'll see it this week when he walks into the temple after this interaction. It's just incredibly heavy because he's not putting it on. He's not pretending to have emotions. He's really living the human experience.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I'm thinking about as this comes out on Wednesday. Tomorrow.
Yeah. Devotional starting.
Devotional starting. Yeah. So people can get that. You know that fun little Bible app that comes pre-installed on your phone? Yeah, it's already on there, which is really cool. So you can just search Menlo Church and you'll find it.
Does the Bible app come pre-installed on your phone? Is that for real?
I'm like 99% sure, yeah.
Wow.
It just comes, I mean, every time I get a new phone, all my apps transfer over, so I don't even know at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe I need a fact checker on this podcast.
I mean, it is like the most downloaded Bible app in the world. So you can get that and then go look for Menlo Church and you'll see Path of Surrender.
If you don't have a smartphone, you could also head over to our website, and there is a link to access it on desktop as well.
Look at that.
And it's really cool. I was able to help put together some of the content, and by put together, I mean film some of the content.
Yeah.
Phil and Cheryl leading us through, and it's really great.
I'm excited.
Yes, yeah. The content's fantastic, and it is very thought-provoking, and so I'm excited for that. And then as Lent kicks off, Phil, how can we encourage people to be, wise about what they're choosing to fast from? How can we encourage them to enter into a process of discernment to really figure out, hey, well, how can I make the best or the most of these next 40 days?
Yeah, I think, again...
Download the app and get the...
download the YouVersion Bible app. I think that, I used the line just a few minutes ago, direction, not destination. Like, I just think that's so important when we practice spiritual habits in our life. It is there's so much pressure to go, this is the outcome that I want. And you've heard me say a million times, don't do it that way. But it's in our culture, this kind of ROI, return on investment, is so prevalent. And so if you frame the next 40 days of, well, if I lose this weight, if I'm able to save this much money, if I'm able to restore this kind of relation, then it was successful. But if not, and I'm just telling you, like, less about what you want to get, more about just getting God himself. And if you do that, I can't promise what your circumstances will look like, but I can promise you that your inner life will be in better shape than it is today. And I think ultimately that's the gift of Lent. So I would also say, if it's okay, if you're listening to this or watching this, that we're now 2 weeks into a new rhythm for our staff. When I got here, our staff met once a month for 3 hours all together, different campuses and stuff. And one of the challenges that we've been trying to navigate as a team is staff culture. There's a big tool called the Best Christian Workplace Assessment, and we've taken it at Menlo for a lot of years, and we've always come back as a toxic culture, which is a super fun thing to say. And it doesn't mean that the staff is bad. It just means that we have a great staff that has to work harder than they should to get things done. And so we've been working on culture a lot around communication in the last year. We took it again a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And this initiative with staff is really about more cycles together, creating greater development opportunities for our team. And so we're praying that God uses it. Last week there were some really cool moments and things that God did. And then we'll tell everybody today. This is you'll hear it after our staff does, because it's going to come up later. But for the first time ever, we're no longer a toxic staff, which is awesome. But we're not where we need to be. Like, we still have lots of work to do. And the thing about staff culture is that's not upfront leadership. Like, that's every individual on a team choosing to do that. And so if you wouldn't mind, a little inside baseball with me, just pray for our team. Whether a staff member thinks that they can be a part of the change of culture or not, they're right. That's true. And I think in culture we think a lot about thermostats versus thermometers, and we need our team to understand their role to be cultural thermostats, where they have a role to play in changing the temperature, and not just going like, oh, this is the temperature today at Menlo. So anyway, I'm hopeful, I'm thankful, and I see the mountain of work in front of us to try and turn the ship. But I can tell you, having been in places where we've moved from really toxic culture to what's called flourishing culture, it's way better. It's so much better to be in a flourishing culture. It's fun to come to work. The culture is actually helping you get things done. People are naturally holding one another accountable. Key performers are rewarded. Underperformers are held accountable. And we are committed to that direction as a team because our church deserves it. Not just our staff, but our church deserves it. So anyway, there you go.
We appreciate all the prayers.
Yep. Yeah.
And we'd love to pray for you as well. Thank you so much for those that do reach out and ask for prayers. Really, I'm thanking people, but I know how hard it can be. I know how intimidating it can be. One, to pray with someone else, but two, to text in to a phone number that comes to our team. And so for those that have sent in prayer requests this week around family, around recovery, around counseling, around trying to get back on your feet, just thank you. And know that those prayers don't go unanswered. We have a great team here that's committed to praying with you and meeting with you as well. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, you can text us 650-600-0402 and let us know. And Phil, thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Have
God bless.
a great week. Bye, everybody.